I will jump right in. Okay, so I just wanted to sort of update those who have joined that you'll notice we are a smaller and more intimate panel today. We are down one member, but rest assured that with the brilliance and wisdom of these two women, facilitated by myself, that we will have an equally impactful session. And I'm actually excited because those of you that have joined us before for our events know that we are always short on time when it comes to addressing all the audience questions. So fingers crossed that we get a little bit more time for engagement today. So welcome everyone, and thanks for taking time out of your Wednesday. Yes, I had to double check what day it was to join us. My name is Laura DeVoe, and I'm the founder and executive director of Women Who Lead. And for those of you who don't know, Women Who Lead is a volunteer-led organization with a mission to passionately engage, educate, and empower women leaders. The content we offer as a network helps to equip women with the skills they need to advance their careers in whatever way they set their sights on and pursue positions of leadership. So we have a lot of different content. If you haven't joined us before, you can visit our website, and we often record our sessions and post them there, so you can sort of binge watch and catch up on the conversations of the past. Today's conversation will focus on the topic of navigating transitions, which is a very broad topic, and sort of all of the elements of transitions that come along with that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and we will dive right into the content that you all registered for. So I'll hand it over to Delilah Ofosu-Barko to start, and then we'll hear from Dr. Sarah Birkin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Delilah Ofosu-Barko. I'm currently the Director of Research Operations within the Institute for Better Health at Trillium Health Partners, and I'm also President of the Canadian Association of Research Ethics Boards. To provide context for what I will share about in terms of my perspective and my journey, it's important that I'm clear about the fact that I am a Black woman, born to immigrant parents. I am a single parent myself, and I am living with an invisible disability, and that all plays a role into my life context and perspective that will inform and influence what you learn and hear about my journey and how I approach navigating transitions.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Birkin. I am an associate professor at the Wake Forest School of Medicine's Department of Implementation Science. And in the past year, I have experienced an uncomfortable number of transitions, including transitioning from the institution where I started my career from the master's program on through a faculty position to a brand new institution in the context of a pandemic. I also ended a 21-year relationship with a very nice man who it became clear I was not supposed to be with any longer. Bought my new home all by myself, began managing my own finances since my partner is a personal financial planner and no longer my partner. So I had to take that role on, and then navigating our two children into that significant change in their lives. So lots of transitions to talk about. Oh, and ending the podcast that I co-host with Whitney Robinson called Acadames in the context of everything that's happened. Felt like a really good time to take a break and something off of my plate. So no shortage of transitions to reflect on.
Thanks so much for that, Sarah. And it sets the stage perfectly for just how broad this conversation can be. You know, every type of start, stop, pause, every transition, not just those that are specific to the professional realm, but everything that represents who we are as people. Whether that's parents, partners, friends, colleagues, professionals, or those who are familiar with Women Who Lead events know everything is fair game, and our panelists and our broader community bring sort of their full selves and full authenticity to our conversation. So really, really excited to see how this unfolds as we jump in. As people know, feel free to be as active as you want in the chat. That goes for our panelists as well. And we'll try to weave some of those questions into the dialogue, and then we'll open it up more broadly for engagement once we get to the end of our sort of curated list of questions. So without further ado, I'll pose question 1 to our panel. Transition is a big term that can mean different things to different people. So what does this topic mean to you? So when we reached out to invite you to speak, what was on your mind, and how has it come up in your life and career?
I'm happy to jump in and start. So for me, as I mentioned in my intro, my personal context is important in framing my response to this question. I'm an individual that is in a constant state of change. Like for me, our bodies, our minds, our contexts change in little ways on a daily basis. And so through this all, we establish our regular cadence of how we function, what we establish as our baseline means of being, or how we show up in all facets of our lives. And so for me as a Black woman, a single parent raising a Black male child and living with an invisible disability, and carrying the legacy, successes, burdens, and trauma of my ancestors and those that have come before me, there are many facets of my life that are constantly changing, which I actively strive to achieve a balance within. So the interdependencies and recognition of the interdependencies of these dimensions of my life are important to how I navigate change. And so in this context, transition to me is a process, and essentially a process of changing from one baseline context to another. And for me, I've actually matured to a state that I strive to never navigate a transition or transitions alone. There are always people, even little people like my son, who's been a part of every single life transition I've been a part of, that are impacted by the changes and transitions in my life. And because of that, I now make a conscious effort to involve them in the process or give them voice and choice to be a part of navigating and support the transition or aspects of the transition. Also, because of the interdependencies and of the various aspects of my life, and my recognition of it, I now take a more holistic approach to transition. So for example, a number of the recent transitions I've had to navigate in life have been a change in how my teams at work had to work, from our physical environment to how we communicate and connect and work together during the pandemic. I feel like I saw at least 1 or 2 of our team members here, so they can attest to that huge transition that we're still actually navigating through. It required us to work differently, create new processes, and expand our capabilities, both collectively as a team and individually as members of a team. In this time, I also navigated 2 quite substantial transitions in my professional roles. So I assumed presidency of a national association that I'd been part of for over 6 years, and assumed a more senior leadership role within my organization, all while supporting my teenage child starting high school, which for me has always been a signal, or always has signaled a requirement to kick in the standard process and practice that I've had to adopt in making sure I advocate for him and demonstrate presence in his school to prevent him from having to bear the weight of systemic racism, specifically anti-Black racism in the Peel District School Board, alone in his academic experiences, and having his first year of high school disrupted by a pandemic. I also made the active choice to prioritize my health. I mentioned I'm living with an invisible disability. I've been living with type 1 diabetes since I was 8 years old, but only really made the conscious decision to prioritize my health this year when the pandemic forced me to think about what are my life priorities and how and when am I going to choose to prioritize myself in my life. And so all of that required me to make a complete shift and how my daily activities were run and managed. And my son has been and continues to be impacted by each of these transitions, as well as members of my family, members of my teams at work in the work environment. And so what I'd say is when this topic came up, it was an important reflective opportunity for me to not only reflect on my own legacy and history and past and journey, but seize this and use this as an opportunity to share with others, because as you'll see in my response later on, one of the things that I think is important is be able to learn from others and have some encouragement. And so I would say, in having the privilege and opportunity and power to reflect on my past experiences, I've been able to learn from and adapt my approach to navigating transitions, and not seeing them as independent transactional experiences, rather a process or concurrent processes that require a balanced approach and recognition of the interdependent dimensions of my life and how they change and impact each other and other people.
Delilah, I smiled so many times during that, and I'm going to pick up on two things because there's probably 20. One that I just felt when you said it was about engaging others with both voice and choice. And so we may pick back up on that later because I think that there's, a practical element, for lack of a better word, to learn or to think differently about managing transitions. So one of the things you showed me is that I was thinking about it as me managing a transition, and what you've done is opened it up to, a community, a network, a family, however you choose to define that. And then the second thing is, as I was listening to you, it struck me that for you, and let me know if this resonates or not, but transition is more like it's a constant state of being.
Absolutely.
It is just, while there might be like micro transitions, you're just like, my life is a transition. There's always something, and we're learning from that and reflecting on that. So, right out of the gate, thank you for the gift of shifting my perspective with respect to this topic.
Yeah, no problem.
Sarah, the floor is all yours.
Yeah, well, Delilah, you set the bar high. That was very compelling, and a lot resonated with me as well about what you said. And so I think what transition means to me is very consistent with what's been said in terms of, one of my favorite phrases is that change is the only constant. And it's true. It really is true. And, I think like a lot of high achieving women, I thrive on control. And it's been an active process for me to relinquish control. Part of why I think I've achieved success is because I have been so strict in the way I've approached life, and I have very high standards. But the deleterious effects of that control far outweigh any benefits. And what I've learned as I've gotten older and relinquished the control that I held on so tightly to is actually everything is better when you relinquish that control. And I'll mention briefly that, that control manifested in all sorts of compulsive behaviors that were damaging to my body, damaging to my friendships, a lot of relationships that I had. And part of the methods that I've used to relinquish that control include therapy, anti-anxiety medication. During the pandemic, I took up yoga and have meditated for a very long time. And a lot of what meditation has taught me is that all we have is this moment. Literally, this is it. We don't have the past, it's gone. And the future isn't ours yet, and we can't pretend that we know what's going to happen. And, that is simultaneously terrifying because it blows up my entire frame of mind and my planning mentality and the way I've become successful. But it's also incredibly freeing. So there are a couple of things I'll tell you that have been very helpful to me. And one way recently that it's been particularly critical. So she was my very first PhD student, Alexis Kirk. she shared with me something that one of her mentors shared with her, this concept of less doing, more being. And the idea is that a lot of what we are running around trying to get things done and be productive is the same dysfunction of that constantly churning narrative in your head that is preventing you from being mindful in your everyday practice, in your everyday experience, and being able to recognize that all you have is this moment, that all of that doing is a distraction, and you're trying to pretend you have control. And by you, I mean me. By trying to get everything done, it makes me feel like I'm in control, but I'm not. None of us is in control, which is terrifying and comforting. The other kind of related idea is don't get through it, be in it. A lot of my life has been predicated on checking things off of a to-do list and just getting through it. You know, I want to get on to the next thing, but what is that next thing? What is it? If there's something I would rather be doing, I should be doing that, because life is short. And this has been particularly useful to me as my 12-year-old has initially indicated that they'd like to be use they, them pronouns, which was very destabilizing to me, even though I consider myself to be very open-minded, and that they'd like to change their name from Jane to Jay. I gave my child that name, and it was hard to give up, but how wonderful that I have a child who is open enough to understand who they are and to share with me that that's who they are, and healthy enough to be thinking about all this stuff. It's not easy, but kind of having this mindset has been extremely helpful in navigating that change, which has been very hard.
I would be surprised if there is a single person in our audience, and I'm quite confident the three of us at the quote unquote front of the room, this will resonate, who, when it's the teeter-totter of being and doing, doesn't feel like they spend the majority of their time doing. It's, you know, happy to raise my hand and say I'm probably just as much a victim of that, and I may take the trophy for it. And what's interesting is, this is just a reflective thought I had, Sarah, as you were sharing some of your examples with us. I wonder how much challenge or friction in transition is created by that what's next mindset. So if you're already one step towards, or what have you, and something shifts, what does that unnecessarily create for you as it relates to, or us, or one, as it relates to navigating a transition? Point number one. Point number two, and I use this framing a lot when I do career development workshops, but we often are so focused on climbing the ladder that we forget to look and reflect on whether that ladder is against the right wall. And there's something to be said for, whether it's career, life, what have you, the value in being and observing and taking a moment to reflect. Because if you get too far up that ladder, the only way to safely get, you know, to a different wall is to climb all the way back down again. So these are all sort of just reflective comments. There's no brilliant wisdom I'm about to drop in the middle of this panel conversation. And the third, so this is just a prompt to everybody that I gave myself in the middle of Sarah's speaking. When something resonates with you in this conversation today, if just once you take a moment to reflect and say, where's that showing up? Where do I feel this? So when we often hear people say in the chat, or see people say in the chat, Yes, that's me too. Like, where does that show up for you? Like, where do you feel that connection? And see if you can be in that feeling instead of thinking about how you connect to it. And maybe that doesn't work for you, but I imagine for some of you, it might change the way you experience the conversation. So Sarah, you've actually touched on this a little bit, but I'll sort of table the next question and we can see where the conversation goes from here. When you think about the transitions you've had, what supports do you wish were available? And I'll use a brief example of my own as a jumping off point. I've said this many times for our Women Who Lead events, but Women Who Lead was born out of the identity crisis I had when I was on maternity leave with my first son. The other mothers I was meeting didn't share the same professional identity as I did. And I couldn't find my people. Like, I had my people before I had my first son, and then I, really, really struggled there. And I think the support, like umbrella wise, that I wish was available are communities like this where people can show up authentically with their full identity in whatever way that's comfortable, and just lay that on the table. Because one of the things that, like, as I feel the tingling in my body right now, listening to these stories, is that no matter whether you can visibly identify with someone or not, there are multiple threads to their story that will connect the two of you. And it's that, especially in the middle of a pandemic, but it's that connection that we create through being authentic and vulnerable that I wish we had more of, because I've never met a person who didn't value the gift that gives. But all that to say, I'll turn it over to the two of you to sort of build on, when you do have a moment to look over your shoulder, what would have been nice, and how that past experience informs the way you show up for yourself and others.
Yeah, and thank you, Laura, for providing that context. I truly appreciate the space that you've created with Women Who Lead in these event series to facilitate and enable that. I think it is so important, and I agree with you about there being some aspect or facet or thread of someone's experience that we can all relate to. I'm connecting with each of you in particular, and even those of the attendees who are sharing in the comments section. So it's great. As it relates to the question in terms of what supports do I wish were available? So one of the things I have experienced and observed in life is that there's usually an assumption that there's a template or a rule or guidebook for life, including how to successfully navigate transitions, and that we should be striving to achieve or accomplish what others we have observed have accomplished. Now, that in and of itself tends to, in some instances, create self-doubt. And so knowing and recognizing that we are each unique in our composition, disposition, context, and worldviews, and that sometimes successful transitions include failure or issues which require us to address them and learn through them and to be successful. And so when I think back about what might have been helpful to me in navigating some of the transitions earlier in my life, in particular at times when I had that concept of, I thought transitions were a single transactional exchange. Some of the things that may have been helpful would include having someone in my corner to, number one, remind me of my value and self-worth, again, to address that whole self-doubt circumstance that may present. Someone to let me know that there is no guidebook, because again, I always felt like, oh goodness, I'm seeing all of these other people doing this. Why can't I do it? Or why doesn't my transition look like that? Or my outcome look like that? And also someone to reassure me that my experiences, specifically the challenges and traumas as a Black woman navigating this life and my transitions, is not a result of my insufficiency, but rather the legacy systems of racism, oppression, and bias that have impacted how some view and perceive me and my capabilities. That realization and actualization, despite my parents telling me and ingraining it in me as a child and in how I was taught to show up in every context and facet of life, that realization for me actually didn't hit until I would say my tweens, mid-teens. And so it would have been helpful to better have someone actually call that out in a way that I understood how and why I was experiencing what I was experiencing was affecting me in the ways that they were. I mean, at that young age, you're still on an emotional maturity journey. And so definitely will treat transitions and changes and opportunities and experiences in different ways. But having someone there to guide, like in my corner, to guide me, to sort of help validate what I'm experiencing would have been so beneficial. As it relates to role transitions, like professional role transitions, what's interesting about my professional trajectory, and I'll give it in the context of the current field that I'm working in, because I've had a number of jobs. I started working really young in high school, but a lot of my professional roles have been, I've been the first one in a role. And so my transitions have been both in me and assuming the responsibility of a new role that was, no one's been in it before. So I was a part of setting the template, but also transitioning my previous roles to another person. And some of the things that I think may have been helpful in this context are a toolkit for role transitions and handover. Those are things that I have started to create in going through these experiences and sort of trying to hand over to someone, or supporting someone in their transition, and having a safe space to try, fail, and learn from. I think, one of the things that I have carried with me all of my life has been an expectation that people are automatically going to assume I'm going to fail, and they're looking for failure in me. And that's been because of some of the environments I have been in and past experiences that I've had. But I must say, I'm currently in an environment where I do have that safe space to try, fail, and learn from. But I think that is always a very important, I think would be, for me in the past, would have been very beneficial and supportive of a number of my transitions, in particular in my professional capacity. But yeah, those are some of the ideas. Those are some of the things that I'm thinking about. So number one, that's the people thing, and both the environment and where possible, where you can sort of template things, having toolkits to support. Here's what you should talk about with someone who's taking on a new role, or here's some information that you should have. Here are people you should speak with, and things of that nature.
Sarah?
Yeah. Laura, when you were talking about that transition you had, when you were on maternity leave, and kind of finding yourself without a community, that resonated with me so much. I had a very similar experience, and I think part of why I experienced that, and perhaps you experienced that, and perhaps any of us experiences the pain of transition, is that we're all kind of pretending that we know what we're supposed to be doing, because let's see, who said it? Sarwali said in the chat that, a lot of the time women are expected to just accept changes. And this relates very much to, I don't know if it was Emily Nagoski originally, but she either coined or cited somebody else about this idea of human giver syndrome, that men are considered to be human beings and their job is just to be, and that women are human givers and our job is to give. And that, Laura, if you or I or Delilah, if you, in the context of a work transition, or addressing the systemic racism in your son's school, were to express some concern or question about whether this was right, or if this was the right way to go about it, that would suggest that we were not completely giving of ourselves. So it's an extremely radical act to voice a lack of a template, like the template Delilah was just talking about, to say, I lack the rules for how I'm supposed to do this, and I need help. That is, in the context of suffering, as we all are from human giver syndrome, a radical act. So I think that we can start to find community by admitting that, by saying, "Oh, me too. I also experienced this horrible thing," which is probably evoking other Me Too situations where when women speak up, we just the act of talking with each other starts to produce some of the change that we need. A woman named Ruth, I knew I was going to forget her last name, but I can look it up. We had her on the podcast and she said, just having women talk to each other is a revolutionary act. It is powerful just to have women talk to one another. So in terms of your question about what supports do I wish I had, I wish that I had been brave enough to say, I don't know what I'm doing and I need help. That I felt exactly what Sar suggested in the comments. Like, I wasn't allowed to say that. By virtue of being a woman, I was supposed to know how to be a mother immediately. It's just not true. I think a lot of the things that when I talk to my friends, my women friends, the thing that comes up over and over again is questioning in one way or another whether the feelings that we're having are legitimate. And we might know cognitively, intellectually, sure, of course, my feelings are valid because they're feelings. But it's really hard to integrate that into practice. And so when I started my new position at Wake, it came with it just wasn't like one new position. It was an amalgamation of like 85 different new roles I was taking on. And that required a lot of me saying, I don't know how to do this. I've never done this before. So I'm going to ask for help where I don't know how to do things. And this may go slowly at first because I've never done this before. For the most part, I've found that people have been pretty receptive to me admitting that I don't know what I'm doing. And it's kind of opened up a channel for other people to do that too. But that doesn't discount the fact that it is radical to take this approach. And I would be remiss not to acknowledge the structural constraints on, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to admit that I don't know how to do this and there isn't a template and my feelings are valid. There are lots of structures in our society that limit our ability to get the information we need or to get the support that we need. Like a lack of real maternity leave in the United States, for example, would have been useful to me. So all of these things.
I feel like we need a little moment, and I imagine that if we were, in a room together, everyone would be like, yes, if my intuition is correct. But I said to my, I'm an introvert, although that surprises a lot of people. I said to my partner at one point during the pandemic, I was like, I can't wait to be in a room full of people speaking to none of them responsible for nobody. Like I was like, I just give me an hour where I don't have to give to anyone. And it's that whole, and it's been exacerbated or amplified when, as privileged as I am to have a home, a wonderful home to live in and healthy family, like it's been a lot to be around them and to constantly be like, where's this? Where's that? Mom, I need this. Mom, I need that. And so I would be shocked if there's anyone who can't relate to that notion of being a human giver. There was also, there's so many sort of strategic or practical pearls in here, and I can't tell you exactly when this happened in my life. I just, while I have strategies, if one of the questions I always ask, like every interview I do, I say, what would you do if you were asked to do something that you've never done before? And I'm not interested in people's, there's no expectation, I should say, that people know everything, but I'm interested in how you think through those problems, because that's life. Like, they let me walk out of a hospital with a tiny human and trust that I would keep it alive. And I remember being like, there's no alarms, like there's no tag on this tiny human that's going to alert them that, I shouldn't be walking out these doors. And I use that example because clearly I was terrified. But that's so many things. There's so many, when people ask you to do something you've never done, or Delilah, step into a role that hasn't existed before, there is no playbook. And people who suggest that there is a playbook other than get comfortable with ambiguity and find your people are lying, because there's no one right way to do anything. And I think that's part of the root of it for me. We will we'll drill down on some of the more strategic focused takeaways for this, but really what I'm hearing is the foundation of there is no one right way. Life is a transition, and the number one strategy that I've employed is sort of curating my circle of mothers, scientists, leaders, what have you, where I can go in those moments that I have self-doubt and say, am I crazy? Pretty sure I'm not. And I, maybe should ask something different than am I crazy? But the reality is, for me, when you recognize you need that litmus test or that sounding board, that's my playbook. My playbook is, to your point, Delilah, earlier in our conversation, is just, it's not just me. Like, there is an army of people that you sort of accumulate over the course of your life that will feed into different transitions. And it highlights, that no one person can be that source, because relationships shift, jobs shift, colleagues shift. And so there's a reinforcement there. I'll sort of weave us on to question 3, and then we'll see what's happening in the chat and if people have questions. So Delilah's highlighted, at least for me and probably for some of you, that there is a tendency to think about transitions as a sort of single transactional event if we're going to be black and white. But it is more multifaceted. So at this point in the conversation, what is that 40,000 foot view of sort of transitions? And it need not be what you've heard, but just curious where each of you are at in this moment right now, because it's all we have. I wish I could have more directly quoted Sarah, but yeah, what is the 40,000 foot view of Wednesday at 2:42 p.m. Eastern Standard Time?
Yeah, for me, this response is pretty brief. It's really a summation of what I hope I've been able to share. But as I mentioned previously, transitions are a process, and navigating transitions requires a recognition of all of the dimensions of your life and the interdependencies among them that are impacted by the simultaneous changes that are occurring from your shift from one baseline context to another. So for me, I'd say it's important to be kind to yourself. I know, Sarah, you talked about the challenge and struggle of, goodness gracious, I just want to have control. There's certain things that we can't control and won't have control over. And there is a lot of unpredictability in life and what's to come. So recognize and acknowledge that there is no one that can and will navigate a transition or a series of transitions in the way that you do or can. So own it, right? Really step into it and make it what you want. Make it your own, and where you have, in particular, where they have an impact on others in your life, find ways to include them so that you're not navigating the transition alone, and that it's a shared experience and journey. To me, it's a journey. It's not a one-time event. It is something that has rippling effects in all facets of life.
I just had this visual of, if we use sort of a metaphor that we're walking through life in a completely white outfit and we're just going to have paint thrown at us. And when that first, paintball comes at you, you're just like, oh my goodness, you've ruined my white outfit. And then by the time you get to the end of your journey, you're this gorgeous masterpiece of all of these colors that represent where you've been. So I'm not sure if that'll resonate with people, but it's sort of like, that first one might be hard, but accept that the constellation of that paint is going to make, one gorgeous outfit that's going to end up in a museum one day because it is unique to you and everybody else admires it, but you think, the original all white outfit was destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, I think my answer is along the same theme, but it's gonna come in the form of a book recommendation. There's an author and teacher, and I think she's some kind of psychologist named Tara Brach, B-R-A-C-H, and she wrote a book called Radical Acceptance. It's been a while since I've read it, but the idea is really just to shake off any preconceived notions about what should be or what should have been. And so, yeah, Laura, your analogy is lovely. And I think that at this time in my life, I think it's important to recognize, I'd love to be able to say, without any chip on my shoulder, just lean into the change and transitions and embrace it all. But it's hard, I get frustrated when I expect, any number of things. When I expect this guy who I've been talking to for, 3 months to call me back in a timely fashion, and he doesn't, I'm not like, oh, that's just the universe, handing to me what it has to offer in the moment. It's frustrating. It's frustrating when my kid doesn't pick up his shoes and put them in the closet after the 9th time I've asked him to do it. These negotiations, these transitions are difficult, but I think if you can view it as constantly contributing to clearer understanding of where your boundaries are, what is acceptable to you and what is not, that will get easier and easier. And I'll end by saying this. One of the biggest challenges I've experienced, and many of my friends seem to also experience, is identifying what our needs and wants are. We've been trained for so long that doesn't matter. And at least for me, that has resulted in a lot of decisions that I wouldn't have otherwise made. So taking and appreciating that all we have is this moment tunes us in to thinking about, in this moment, is there anything I need or I want? Just in this moment. We're not talking the 10-year plan. We're just saying right now, are things okay? Am I thirsty? Am I hungry? Am I lonely? Am I irritated? And if so, why? And then we can kind of slowly graduate to, okay, well, why? Why do I have this feeling? Is it within my control? Is it not within my control? And then to the extent it's not within my control, communicating that to somebody who does have control over it. And just slowly building up these skills that, men, I'll say, have been trained from the moment they were born to understand and articulate and demand in many cases. And it's going to be a process, and sometimes a very uncomfortable one, but doing it with the goal of constant improvement.
this is like the simultaneous challenge and gift of facilitating these. There was one point where I was like, okay, I have 3 clear takeaways, and then I just got so caught up in experiencing Sarah's response that I think I lost some of them. But let me see if I can bottom line 3 things on the fly. One, and this is not a universal truth, this is just my strategy or truth at the moment, is that by no means have I got it figured out, but when I realized that I could anchor my decisions to my core values, it's easier to navigate things. You say yes and no to opportunities based on what matters to you. And part of what you said, Sarah, that reminded me of that is, so often it's like, what do other people expect? What is I hear so often about traditional pathways, and it's like, what do you want to do? Figure within reason and within availability and opportunity, of course, but do something different. Nothing stops you from changing what's possible. And the second thing, and this should be the third thing, but it's on the tip of my tongue now, and loops back to what Delilah said, the constant is, the circle that you curate, or the people in your network or your community. And the what's will shift, and sometimes the people shift too. But what we've heard throughout is just the need for, I called it a hype woman earlier, but those people that will validate and will reinforce, or as Delilah mentioned earlier on, reorient you to your values when you just got off track a little bit because things got crazy. Even though it feels like that's every other day in the last 18 months. So the first is values, the second is people. And the third is actually, I have the pleasure of knowing you both and being impressed by, what you accomplish or what people would see on your CV or your LinkedIn or the titles you've held. But what's actually more impressive is how people manage, whether we label it as a transition or not, those ambiguous situations or those areas of gray. And so if that resonates with you as you hear that, it offers a flip in perspective. This transition, this slog through the mud or whatever it feels like, is actually how I handle this or how I experience it or what have you is part of what makes you who you are. And then it becomes slightly less of an inconvenience depending on the circumstances, and perhaps a bit more of an opportunity to sort of reorient the things that matter. I'm going to pick up on a question that came into the chat. Delilah, very early on, you mentioned engaging others in transition and change by giving them voice and choice. How do you involve someone while recognizing their place in your life and where they are in their life? The example here is they're your child, but we may have others. And how do you deal with change that your people are going through or inadvertently imposing on you? So that was a lot, but is still sort of front and center in the chat if we need to pull that up. We'll go to you first, Delilah, and then Sarah will come over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Elizabeth. Pleasure to meet you. Thanks for posing that question. So I can speak from my personal experience, and what I'll say, and I'll use the example of my child. As I mentioned, single parent, I've been raising him alone since he was born. He's now 15, turning 16 in December. And so what that looks like and has looked like with him has differed across his life. I mean, the more recent changes or transitions in my life in particular, me assuming a new leadership role in the organization, that came with different, a change in my scope of responsibility. He was already familiar with the work I did, the teams that I worked with. And so it was an open conversation with him about this is what's happened. And we had, it was a great learning opportunity for him to understand how to navigate career transitions, as well as what it meant, both not only for me and my work, but what it meant for him and us as a family unit. And so sharing, being pretty transparent and open, both using it as a learning opportunity so that he can learn and equip himself with these skills and knowledge and know-how to navigate life and the world, but also in letting him know that, this means this. This may need to change in this way because of X, Y, and Z. How do you feel about that? How would you like to see this turn up in how we live. And I mean, again, this all happened while navigating the pandemic and him being in a mixed model of hybrid model of school and then being at home always. And so we had to figure out ways to shift our living environment so that he could be online at school and I could be online working and not interrupting each other and things of that nature. So again, right now he's at an age where he has better faculty and capability to help inform decisions for himself that are affected by particularly that particular transition. But when he was younger, it was tempering it down to things that were manageable at that age. Like, you know, now that this is the circumstance with us, so say our financial circumstance has changed due to a transition. Right now, I know you really enjoy this activity and exercise and doing this one as well, but you need to make a choice. Which one would you prefer to do right now? And so giving him choice and voice, and I consciously made the decision to do so because as a Black male child, there aren't many opportunities in life where he will have and has had choice. And I wanted to make him know that he does, and where he does have choice and option. As the second half of the question, as it relates to how do you deal with change that your people are going through and that are inadvertently imposing on you? I think in the same way that I mentioned, having people there to support me and be a part of my change and transition, I endeavor to do the same for others. And so that human touch and being there and understanding what someone is going through, what supports they need and how you can be of support are really helpful and valuable. I've found that very beneficial, both not only in my personal life, but also in my professional life. We've had a number of our staff members transitioning through different things. I have staff members who've transitioned to other roles in different organizations, even in different provinces, that are still keeping in contact with me to keep me up to date with things that are happening with them, seeking advice on how do I navigate this and navigate that. So I think in the same way that we find value in having a sort of support system there for us, being able to show up in ways that you are capable to for others as well.
That reminds me of one of the other things that Sarah had brought up in her last response, just around boundaries, being clear about, not just what you're capable of, but where your boundaries are. And in addition to how we engage others, I'm going to add one more element to that. Sometimes it's not about active engagement, but just giving people visibility into something. So there are times when I may say to put this in a professional context for a moment, times where I might say to my team, like, this is what I'm managing in parallel to this, or this is what's happening. And say to them, like, this is just for your visibility. It may, the way I show up over the next week, 2 weeks, or what have you, may make more sense if you have knowledge of this experience or this filter. So there's, like everything, there's a gradient or a continuum of what it means to engage or give visibility to the transitions or things that you're experiencing. Sarah, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, a lot of what I'm going to say is very consistent with what Delilah has said, but I can say it in a different way and with respect to some of the things that I've experienced. So, the example of when the person is your child is kind of an extreme case that gives us insight into a case where you're much less in charge of, say, somebody you supervise. Change is going to happen for all of us, and sometimes people don't have a choice in the change that's going to happen. That's an extreme case, and people are going to have feelings about something over which they have no control. So I can think of an example that I'm aware of where there was a job candidate who had been under consideration for many, many months. And after a long, arduous decision process, was told that he wasn't going to be considered for the position moving forward. And he sent a very offensive response to the chair of the department. And I think this is an example of sometimes you just have feelings that you need to acknowledge that you have and take a minute and decide whether or not that needs to be communicated to anybody else. And oftentimes those feelings don't need to be communicated to anybody else. There are lots of things that happen that we just have no control over. They're extremely frustrating, sometimes unjust. And I think the slippery slope, or the kind of the question becomes, at what point do we kind of accept that this is happening? And at what point do we decide that we need to engage in a way to change the source of the change? So I'm thinking about, like the systemic racism that Delilah is talking about. I imagine that there were a lot of negative outcomes from that, experiencing that structural racism. And for many people, for many reasons, may have had to experience that and bear the burden of the feelings associated with experiencing that racism. And for other people, including Delilah, they had the resources and wherewithal to do something in response to it. But I think it's a careful navigation of figuring out whether action is necessary and whether it's reasonable given the resources that you have available. And as my grandmother used to say, sometimes the life you have to save is your own. So I'm going to drop in the chat. It's not a link to the actual interview, but you can Google the interview that Ezra Klein did with a philosopher named Agnes Callard. And Agnes Callard is a philosopher who talked in part about the difference between coaching and teaching. They were talking in the context of podcasts and about how a lot of podcasts have just become kind of people saying, I'm this really unique individual who has achieved great success. And if you just be like me, then you'll achieve that success too. And Dr. Callard talks a lot about how harmful that can be, and how an alternative to that is coaching, right? With coaching, you have specific information about an individual and what resources they have available, what their hopes and dreams are, what their boundaries are. And so as you're helping somebody navigate a change, I think, having that, if you have the inclination, which ideally you do if you're supervising somebody, to understand an individual's circumstances, to tailor your coaching to them about how they might navigate the change. And that might involve sponsoring them and advocating for them to receive resources that they're not getting to help manage the change. It might just involve modeling, handling a change in a way that you think would be ideal, hopefully representing some of what we've talked about today. For me, I'll just say one of the things that has been challenging to me is coming to recognize that not everything needs to be acted upon. For somebody like me, I see an injustice, or I see a change that's coming that I don't feel like should be coming, and I want to do something about it. And sometimes something does need to be done, but sometimes I'm not the person to do it. So recognizing that is a nuance.
Sarah, you made me think of so many things as you went through that, and one of them is around the distinction between whether it's coaching and mentorship, or sponsorship and teaching. And I've spent, spurred on by the pandemic, a lot of time over the last year doing coaching training, because I realized I'm up against a wall where explaining how I've navigated things and having that two-way conversation is only helping get people so far. And one of the key distinctions that I often say when I'm coaching people is that you're going to come to me looking for a solution to a problem or somewhere that you're stuck. And my job is actually to help you navigate towards that solution. It's to be like, often we have the answer, we just can't find it. It's buried under emotion and experience and competing priorities. And so it's often, I'll offer people a couple of questions that you can either ask yourself or use when you're supporting others in navigating these transitions. And then, Kay, we will get to your question. I promise that I see it. But simple questions, and it's like, the short and sweet, like, what is a good outcome here? Or what does success look like? And to your point, Sarah, like sometimes it's that there isn't actually something to be done. It's just, I just needed to let it out. Like there is no outcome that we're pursuing here. How will you know you've achieved, if there is an outcome, how will you know that you've achieved it? Another thing that I often ask in those sort of emotionally charged areas is, what do you want to feel like? And how do we get there? Because to your point, Sarah, often with your example of like, this doesn't need to be said, I can identify what I want to feel like. And then pretty quickly, myself or others will realize, okay, well, that venting or that communication isn't going to help me feel that way. It's just something so often if you can reframe it to how do you want to feel and what's going to get you to that point, it's a helpful thing. And the other two questions you can ask people in a transition, although there's a laundry list, are what's one thing that feels right about this? And what's one thing that feels wrong about this? So that they can sort of focus in on, some of the components as opposed to what feels a little bit more overwhelming when you label it as a transition overall. It's less digestible that way. Kay also put a question in the chat, and she said she's asking, as a recently graduated master's student who is now on the job hunt, what advice do you have for trying to step foot into a profession for the first time post-education? What transitions can I expect during the job search process in terms of balancing finding available work and searching for specific job qualities that excite me? It is easy to feel like seeking specific roles is being too picky. I'm gonna use an analogy here. This one's a food analogy, which is normally the type of analogy I am drawn to. For me, I think about early career, and let's say that that's the first 5 years, but everyone defines that in their own way. Think about it like grocery shopping somewhere you've never been. You're going to need to pick things up, see what the ingredients are, decide if you want it to go into your cart, or decide if once you've looked at it, you want to put it back. And that's how I view sort of the first couple of jobs, that you're going to learn both things that you don't want to pick up again, and things that you want to keep with you. And so the sort of bottom line piece of advice there is, think like a scientist, and it's trial and error. Like try things on, see if you like them, and you'll not only develop skills, but you'll learn sort of what it is you're looking for. And more importantly, you'll just learn what's out of scope, because early in your career, this interests you and this doesn't. And over time, you're going to narrow that focus. But Delilah, Sarah, curious to hear what your thoughts are on jumping into the transition of navigating the job world coming out of school.
Yeah, I mean, to build on what you've said, I agree with you, Laura. I mean, every opportunity, and not just a job opportunity, but even ones that you're exploring, whether it's a job posting that you've seen, or if you've advanced to the stage where you're having an interview, like you literally use those as learning opportunities to understand yourself as well as the environment. I think one of the things I wish I had known early on in my career was the importance of understanding the environment, the work environment that I was applying to enter into, because that plays a huge role in not only what you will learn, but who you will emerge to be out of that circumstance. And so it's important to, take on opportunities that allow you to sample, for lack of a better word. So I'll say, I can share that I've worked in, I swear, so many different sectors: insurance, underwriting, trade services, sales at a technology store. And there is not one job, and I'm using job with quotations just to say that, because a lot of what I've done for gainful employment hasn't been because I've had a passion for that work. But in every single job that I've had, there has not one job that I have not taken something from it, whether it's the tactical transactional work that I was doing, or the nature of the relationships, or the dynamic in the environment. It is important to think about why am I applying for this job first and foremost? What can I take and build, learn? What can I take from this opportunity, and what can I give back to it also? That's something that I have adopted in my own approach. And to your question or your point about what transitions can you expect during the job search process, I'll say it's going to be a self-learning journey. You're going to learn a lot about yourself, both in how you approach the job search process, in what some of your responses to questions people may ask of you might elicit in you in terms of self-reflection. So just be there, be present in the journey, and don't feel as though there has to be a particular structure or format that you follow, and don't criticize, don't listen to any criticism about being too picky. It's important that where you have space and capacity to have choice in what it is that you're applying for and what it is that you accept, do so. If you have the ability to be selective, do so. It's so important.
I think I have oddly specific advice with respect to this question. I think that what it comes down to is the people. Instead of thinking about the projects that you'd work on, or the clinical area, or whatever objective, quote unquote, objective features of the job, I've learned through many various positive and negative experiences, at the end of the day, working with people who are kind and thoughtful and who believe in you and respect you and you respect them, that's it. There's nothing else. Like, the buck stops there. If that is not there, it's a no-go. It doesn't matter how great the project is. It's going to be, challenging at best and miserable at worst. I guess that's not worst, but you can see where I'm going with that. I think that the challenge is figuring out, okay, well, what does that, how do you figure that out, right? A lot of the time, especially in 2021, that's a video job interview or something like that. I think that's okay, but I don't know if there are any resources out there for kind of getting to know you questions, but of course they always ask you in job interviews, do you have any questions for us? So maybe one of those questions could evoke a response regarding kind of what's the climate in this organization around mutual respect? And is something like, what happens when there are dissenting opinions about, issues that are coming up? How is that handled? And if there isn't a formal process in an organization to hear all voices, that's a red flag. So I think it can be as straightforward as that. And ideally, there is an energy, right? At this point in time, I think it's mainstream now, this idea that our bodies know more than our brains do a lot of the time, and those kind of physical feelings of comfort or distress can be really indicative of whether this is a good match. Do you feel like you would be supported? And sadly, I think that will narrow your pool sufficiently to make the decision slightly less complicated.
I couldn't agree more with you, Sarah. And I often say to people, the job won't love you back. The people will be there to care for you. So it is sort of I would say, like, it's just as important to me, if not more, than what I'll be doing. And here's a couple of questions that I either like, no matter what side of the table I'm sitting on, that I ask. And, you know, you can either ask these or it can inspire you to ask whatever questions come to mind. I really like asking, what's the last nice thing you did for someone? And, you know, Sarah, to your point, I actually find I don't ask a lot of questions about process, because those can be canned responses. And so I like to understand how people think. So I ask, what's the last nice thing you did for someone? I've never asked this one in an interview, but I've asked it when I connect with people sort of one-on-one. If you could have any meal right now, what would it be? And I'm just curious, you know, if that surprises them and how they think through it. And like, I just genuinely like food. So I'm curious about what you would eat. And that's just about also showing up as who I am and seeing how that meshes with the person across the table from me. And I also really love asking the question, like, what makes you happy at work? And seeing what people's response to that is. And I want to know that if I'm bringing someone onto my team, because it matters to me that you're happy. But I also want to know that about the people I work with, like, no matter where they are sort of in relation to my role, because that's what matters. And you could, like, there's so many questions you could ask people, that these don't have to be professional type questions. They can be, you know, personality type questions, just to see how you mesh. Like, if you were a chocolate bar, which one would you be? And then some people be like, not chocolate, chips. And I need to know that salty sweet divide, if it exists. There is another question in the chat, which I think is a great one that pivots us a little bit. How do you cope or reconcile with managing a transition poorly? Whatever poorly may mean to you.
Yeah, so I mean, what I would say is similar to what I mentioned earlier. And Elizabeth, thank you. You're asking all of the thought-provoking questions, or a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them. There is no playbook, right? And so who gets to define or set what good or poor is? There may be circumstances as you navigate a transition. Again, transition is a process. Like, for me, a transition is a process. There may be circumstances that don't turn out the way that you had expected or planned. But it's important to recognize that, you know what, hey, this is not exactly how I wanted this to go, but learn from it and build from it to course correct and adjust it. I think it's important to acknowledge and recognize those things in those times. It's important to be able to show and share that vulnerability, so that others as well that are watching you, that are influenced by you, that will come after you, know that it's okay to do that. There is no, I think it's unfortunate that, as Sarah, you mentioned, for most of us as women, we've been expected to just show up and do, constantly deal with. And I think one of our attendees has also mentioned it. There's an expectation that we're just able and capable and should be able to manage all of these concurrent changes with no qualms, without fault or flaw. And I think it's important to acknowledge and recognize we are all human, and we're prone to error. We're prone to being able to learn and be vulnerable in our learning and in our growth and in our trajectory. Sometimes we're testing new boundaries that haven't been nothing, like there hasn't been a precedent. And so there's very few things in life that have been created without failure. And so I think, again, just be kind to yourself, but also don't feel as though you can't acknowledge that something didn't turn out the right way, or that outcome is the be all and end all. There's always an opportunity to learn from it and find ways to work through it, and use it, even if it doesn't turn out, use it as a learning lesson, a life lesson for yourself and others, in terms of how to navigate and how maybe to take a different approach in navigating a particular change or transition. that's my perspective, and that's the perspective I've chosen to take. In how, again, I've bumped into many circumstances with a number of my transitions where things had not, I've decided, oh, I'm going to do this, and this is going to translate into that, and didn't turn out that way. I didn't sit and wallow in it. I took a moment to step back and say, goodness, that's not what I had expected, and did the damage control to make sure that anybody impacted by the negative outcome, if there was one, had an opportunity to have a conversation and resolve it, but then finding a way to learn from that and move forward.
Yeah, I mean, my interpretation of the question is kind of that once you kind of recognize that your response to a change was not as elegant as you would have preferred. I don't know if I'm interpreting that correctly, but I think I might experience that like on a daily basis. And I just feel like empathy is, my therapist constantly talks about how, you really can't empathize with other people if you can't empathize with yourself. And I have definitely found that to be true, that, being able to say, shoot, I did not behave the way I would have liked, and I'm sorry. And sometimes you get a do-over and sometimes you don't. But if you do get a do-over, it's an opportunity to say, I did X. I'm concerned that it had Y effect, and I want to apologize for it. And, if you have the ability to say how you would do it differently, if you had it to do over again, you can. But if you don't have that opportunity, it still can be an opportunity for yourself just to think about, like, what happened there? Like, what were the circumstances that led to me behaving in a way that I regret? And, trying to generalize just a little bit to think about, okay, what kind of other situations would I be faced with? Like, as a parent, I am going to be faced with, changes foisted upon me by my children all the time because they're always changing too. And so one of the things I've gotten really good at doing is apologizing, which is not a strength I have, but, being like, oh, I didn't realize that's what you meant. Sure, yeah, we can do that. And having the humility not to be like, well, I'm the mother, so, I'm always right. I think humility goes a long way, and just being like, I'm human, sorry, made a mistake.
I love the little shrug there. So there's sort of three takeaways for me here. One is, and not knowing, Elizabeth, if you have a specific sort of transition in mind, but the first is like, what makes you feel like you navigated it poorly? Because as I reflected on your question, sometimes it's just me who thought I navigated it poorly, because we're often our own harshest critic. So just, if that happens to resonate with people, just first and foremost, ask yourself, like, am I the one who thinks I navigated this poorly, or is there something externally suggesting that I navigated this poorly? The second thing is to reflect, again, when I think back on the laundry list of transitions that I haven't navigated the way I wanted to, sometimes, and Sarah pointed to this earlier, when you really get at the root of something and sort of sit with it and figure out why, I've realized that actually wasn't something I really wanted to pursue. Like that, when I think about it, like I didn't navigate it well, but my heart wasn't in it. And so sometimes that's why it teaches me that actually this wasn't aligned with my values or my purpose or what have you, because sometimes we get caught up in the doing. I don't know if that resonates with anyone else, but I definitely sometimes enter, smaller transitions with like just by inertia. And then, there is, I see your question, Maggie, and we'll finish off with that one. Then the third piece is really around, and I'm going to echo this because I really think it matters, but like owning it. I have the pleasure of working with Delilah right now, and the number of times in the past week I have probably said to her like, "Oh, I didn't like. Okay, that didn't really play out the way I thought it would or wanted it to." And I think that's actually not to speak on her behalf, but like that's the strength in how we function, is that we can show up and own, create a space where we can authentically connect around that, but say like, okay, that didn't go as well as I thought, and create a dialogue around it. Because again, maybe it's just in my head, or maybe I learn a strategy, a skill, a point of reflection that helps me navigate the next situation in a better way. But it also models for anyone in your working or personal environment, at anyone at all, that like this is common. Like this is a normal part of life, to feel like you didn't show up exactly the way you wanted to in a situation, a transition, or what have you. So recognizing that we have 6 minutes left, I will pose Maggie's question to the group, and we can sort of end on this note. What is the key advice or strategies? This is a great one, Maggie, to manage all that life throws at you, work, life in general. So perhaps I'll rephrase that a bit, but like, what's a bottom line takeaway, given that we've now sort of framed this as like a holistic inevitability of life? What's sort of a key pearl you want to leave our community with?
Maggie, what has worked for me, and again, there was a time point in the pandemic where I had a lot of time to do some self-reflection. It's about prioritization. Understand who you are and what's a priority for you, and create and make the space and time for those things that are important. And, shift I think it's unrealistic to expect that we can assume responsibility for 48 hours worth of things in a 24-hour time period. Recognizing that our mental health and well-being requires that we eat and that we sleep and that we rest and we have downtime. So for me, I think it's really about being true to who you are, spending some time to understand and prioritize all those facets and things and elements and aspects of your life, and creating the time and space for them in ways that are most meaningful to you, that allow you to accomplish what it is that you feel you've committed to. And at times that might mean that you need to cut back on things and say no, create those boundaries that Laura had mentioned. But yeah, that's the piece of advice I would give.
And this time I think I have complementary advice to what Delilah said. So one of the most useful things I've gotten out of meditation is how fleeting our emotions are. And I get very overwhelmed by all that life throws at me. So, having a full-time job, solo parenting half of the time, learning how to run a household all by myself, including finances and everything, which I had not done until the age of 40. And I recognize what an unbelievable privilege that is, but it was overwhelming to me, and has been. And then the school stuff, and then the pandemic stuff, and what is really comforting to me is how fleeting our emotions are. So I welcome recommendations for meditation apps, because the one I have, I love, but I cannot recommend. The man who does it, I have issues with, but the app is quite good. It's called Waking Up, and I've really benefited a lot from it. And Sam Harris, the developer, talks about how you cannot hold on to the feeling that you have in response to a stimulus longer than it is present for. And the half-life of any feeling that you have is so short. So when I feel just like oppressed by the stress of that bill is due, and I have to sign that permission slip, and that grant is due, and all of that, I think about how fleeting those feelings are, because they're quickly replaced by other things, like a friend calls, or I remember a wonderful conversation I had once with my grandmother, or I'm excited about this upcoming thing. These things are so transitory. And so just appreciating how all of what life throws at you is just, a drop in the bucket of a lifetime of experiences, and it will be important for the moment it exists, and it will be unimportant for all other moments.
I'll add sort of a bottom line takeaway there that, in addition to sort of change being the only constant, the only other constant in your life is you. And so you need to give yourself grace, and you need to try, endeavor to decide, like, is this current thing, situation, transition, however you want to label it, something that I want to stick to me? Do you want this paint on your outfit, or do you want it to sort of drop off? And there are very few things, and they're all people, that I want to stick. And when I can realize that, like, this just isn't something that I want to, carry with me till the end, then it, for me at least, it helps managing everything that life throws at you, because that's never going to stop. Life and people will throw things at you, but it's not your responsibility to catch it all. It's not even your responsibility to pay attention to it all. On that note, I'm very mindful of the time. I think this is as precise as we have been in wrapping up one of our sessions. So thank you so much to Sarah and Delilah, and we will loop back with the group to hopefully post this recording, and we're grateful for all the engagement in the chat. So happy Wednesday, everybody. Take care of you.